Good afternoon, college basketball fans. My name is Zach Greene, and today I have the honor of joining Brendan Marks joining us, who covers UNC as well as Duke basketball for the Athletic, and my fellow friend and buddy Evan Kamikow, who has been a lifetime Hoosiers fan? Question mark.
college time if that counts.
Yeah. So yeah, today, I mean, it's less than 2 weeks away, and at least for me as well as you, Evan, I believe this is going to be the biggest game of our tender in Bloomington as students, at least, right?
I think it absolutely has the big games that you look at. I mean, the Purdue games are always big. You know, you're in the Big Ten, so you see a ranked Michigan team. Typically, Wisconsin's up there, Ohio State, but you really haven't had a number one team walk into Assembly Hall. And if they're still number one when the game, goes on, which I assume they will be, this is definitely the biggest game that Indiana's ever had in at least my 4 years, and Zach, your 3 years as well.
For sure. And then I'll shoot that one to you, Brandon. As far as a non-conference, away game, I wanted to just briefly ask you, I mean, these are two of the most historic programs in college basketball. How meaningful is this game to both programs?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And we've gotten some good matchups in the ACC Big Ten Challenge the past couple of years. But this is a different magnitude, I think, especially for North Carolina. Having a lot of ties to Indiana, frankly. I mean, Sean May, one of the former sons of the state. You've got Jalen Washington, who probably won't be available for that game, but coming out pretty recently. So, I mean, it's a huge game for North Carolina. And, the Tar Heels have not played a true road environment like that really yet this season. And obviously they had multiple opportunities to do so last year in Hubert Davis's first year. Going into Cameron for Coach K's last game is certainly a crazy environment, but it'll be a whole new test for this team. And first true road game. It's going to be a big one for sure.
All right. So I want to move on to, both of these programs have played 3 games so far in the season, with UNC struggling. But that said, Indiana has, played Morehead State, and then I can't even remember the other school, but
Cookman.
all I know is that it was just, what was the school's name? I can't even remember.
It was Bethune-Cookman, and yeah, they beat him as bad as you'd think Indiana would beat a Bethune-Cookman.
Yeah, Bethune-Cookman. So, let's call it a push, right? That said, I just wanted to let's start with you, Evan. Like, what are your, first impressions and thoughts so far through the first 3 games?
Well, I think, and Indiana's only played 2 so far. The third game is going to be against Xavier, depending on when this airs, whether, that's tomorrow night, because we're filming this on the 17th, or already it's past. But I think the biggest thing for Indiana is those 2 games for me were polar opposites. You had, kind of your first game against Morehead State was really neck and neck at first, and it was the second team. And that's been the theme for this Indiana team. It's their second team, their second unit. That's really been, the driving force of why this team has been competitive. And because the starters have really gotten out to a slow start. Xavier Johnson has gotten in foul trouble. Trace Jackson-Davis in the first game didn't really look like himself. And even the second game, he had 21 points, but nobody really realized it's that second unit. But the biggest thing is it's the shooting. And I'm going to keep saying it over and over again in the 10, 15 minutes that we're going to be on, is that the first game you shot 1% from 3. That's not going to do it. The second game, 46% from 3. Miller Kopp finally came alive, 12 points, all off of the 3. So how does Indiana look? I'm not sure. But if they look like the second game, they're going to look really good.
All right, I'll shoot that on to you now, Brendan. And yeah, sorry, I was thinking as well as the scrimmage games, which arguably were better than the Bethune-Cookman game. Yeah. All right.
For North Carolina, frankly, it's been a pretty disappointing start to the season. I mean, they're 3-0, and the caliber of competition is, it's not ACC Big Ten caliber competition. It's Gardner-Webb and it's College of Charleston. But North Carolina's not pulling away from these teams. I mean, they trailed at half to College of Charleston, built up a 16-point lead against Gardner-Webb that got all the way back down to 6 points with, 5 minutes or so left in the game. And they just haven't really looked in sync. They've looked incredibly disjointed. I think they're shooting about 27% from 3. Caleb Love is shooting, I think, under 20% from 3 right now. And, this looks like a team that is still, sort of marinating in the Final Four run from last year. And Hubert Davis has basically said as much. He's like, look, these guys are not playing with a ton of joy right now. They're playing like they're burdened by the expectations of what they're supposed to be. And yeah, I think a lot of people, remember the Final Four run from last year, and they forget that for most of the season, North Carolina was not very good. And for most of the players on this team, they have never been very good during their North Carolina careers. So this is a whole different set of expectations. It's a whole different standing in the national college basketball conversation. And they're certainly still adjusting. So if North Carolina doesn't start playing better much, much quickly, then we're looking at a situation where, be it in Portland or be it against Indiana, there's going to be some, consequences for their not playing well.
I want to follow up and just ask you quickly. I know as far as Indiana goes, I've worried about the expectations being a little bit too high. Would you agree with that as well with the Tar Heels, or is it just more of like you said, like the March Madness run they went on last year, like not getting over that?
I think it's the expectations, yes, for sure. This is the number one team in the country. When you're the number one preseason team in the country, what are you supposed to do? Win the national title. When you've got 4 of 5 starters back from a team that played in the national title, what are you supposed to do? Win the national title. All of the players are asked at the start of the season at media days and all these, gatherings, is it championship or bust? Yes, it is. Like, they're doing it to themselves to some extent, but like, that is the mindset. And, on paper, I think North Carolina probably has, if not the best starting 5 in the country, then one of the 3 best. You could probably make the argument for like, Houston and a couple of other teams, but like, they're right there. They've got all the pieces, they've got all the ingredients, but again, like, they've never had people talk this favorably about them. Armando Bacot and these guys, like, they were a part of Roy Williams's worst team. They were a part of Roy Williams's first team to ever get bounced out of the NCAA tournament. These guys had not won an NCAA tournament game before last spring. So certainly expectations are something different for them. And so far, they haven't necessarily handled them very well.
And I'd love to piggyback off of that, too. I think that's a great point where even if you look at both of these teams, I mean, Mike Woodson, this is year 2 for him, at least for Indiana, and Hubert Davis, year 1. It was unexpected. They weren't really ranked during the season at all. I don't think they really were after, the first couple of weeks when they had some tough losses. So these are 2 teams that everybody, now you have expectations of them, but they haven't played with these expectations before, either of them, whether that's Indiana and, you have Trace Jackson Davis, who's preseason All-American, and you can be all of those awards. But it doesn't matter when you hit the court, right? Like, we can talk about this. We're media. We can say whatever we want. But expectations, it's one thing to have them in media, and it's another thing if you're the players. And especially with 2 teams that you're going to assume, like, it's UNC, it's Indiana, they're big brands, but they're new teams, brand new coaches in year, 2 for both of them. So if you really look at it, I don't think that they really know how to play with expectation yet. And that's okay. That's something that they'll have to figure out. But again, if we're going to sit here and say after 3 games into the season, 2 games into the season, whatever, they're going to be bad if they're both 2-0, 3-0 and undefeated going into this matchup, it's a bit unrealistic. But at the same time, expectations, like, what do they mean right now? It's November. We saw it last year. Everyone wrote off UNC. A lot of people wrote off Indiana early on because of Mike Woodson. Where did they go? They both, Indiana had that great run in the Big Ten tournament. UNC, national championship finalists. Like, expectations now versus expectations in April, they're a lot different.
Yeah, I completely agree. Couldn't say it better. And, I think that's the thing too, is like, for these coaches being in year 2, I think what they're both learning right now is that whatever you had last year, you never have the exact same team. You may have key contributors back. You may have guys that them, you're expecting more of them, but how it all comes together is different on a year-to-year basis. And so I think it's something where these coaches have to learn that, and they have to realize that and adjust accordingly.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So moving on to the next question, and I know you guys have briefly mentioned a couple players, but I think as far as UNC goes, Armando Bacot, busted, jumped on the scene, as well as Caleb Love in the March Madness, Final Four, just outstanding. But after watching the Gardner-Webb matchup, there are some other players to watch out for as Hoosiers fans. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, Armando Bacot and Caleb Love are sort of the lifeblood of this team. They're both preseason All-Americans. Armando, basically got every double-double record that existed last season. kind of crazy. I don't know if people realize this, but he is going to be UNC's all-time leading rebounder, like career-wise, by the end of the season. So, I mean, he's going to pass Tyler Hansbrough. He's going to pass Antoine Jameson, Brad Dougherty. Like he's going to pass multiple like greats, like legends. So he's that good. I think the guy who's going to be really interesting for me in this matchup is Pete Nance, and IU fans should know him well from his time in the Big Ten. At Northwestern, he was sort of the guy. At North Carolina, he's like the fourth or fifth option, which I think is a really good fit for him. He doesn't have to do everything. He doesn't have to score 20 points a game. He doesn't have to be the offensive focal point, but defensively, he's obviously going to have his hands full with Trace. And that's a matchup that I think UNC is willing to take its chances with. Pete is savvy. He does a little bit of everything. He had 3 threes in their latest win over Gardner-Webb, which was the first time he's made a 3 at UNC. He can handle the ball a little bit. He brings the ball to the floor. He's a capable passer. They like using him as like an initiator and DHO handoff stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how he matches up with Trace. But that is a guy who I think is going to be one of the swing players in this game. And how well they are able to take advantage of each other, Pete versus Trace and Trace versus Pete, I think is going to go a long way towards determining the winner.
I'm so mad you brought that up because that was like the biggest point that I was going to make. And especially I'll dive a little bit more into Pete and then I'll throw something else out there. If you look at Pete, last time he played Indiana, he only had 6 points. And that was a game where Indiana had no Tamar Bates, no Xavier Johnson. It was really just Trace and Race and Trey Galloway in that game. And Indiana really relied on the guards. And I still believe Trace put up like 15, 20 points in that game. So if you really look at kind of that matchup of Pete Nance, Indiana kind of had his number last year. They limited him. It was Boo Buie who actually had 18 points for the Wildcats in that win. It was 59-51. But I'll move on from Pete. Also Miller Kopp too. He was a Northwestern Wildcat, really good friends with Pete Nance. Pete came to Bloomington a couple of times in the spring, and Miller showed him around. And we were all saying, "Oh, maybe Pete Nance is going to come again, be here." But I think the returning of Race and Trace was why Nance didn't come to Indiana. Anyway, I want to move on to another one. It's going to be Jalen Hood-Schifino and Caleb Love, the battle at the guard position, and I'll throw Xavier Johnson in there too. Indiana's issue right now is they have a lot of inexperience in their secondary guys. You have someone like Trey Galloway who doesn't necessarily handle the ball that often, but is getting more in there. And Jalen Hood-Schifino, I know people have been raving about him, but I'm a little bit skeptical. And I know that I've gotten laughs when I've said that to people, but he doesn't seem like he's up to speed. Yeah, he had 8 points, and all the media against Bethune-Cookman were like, why wasn't he playing better? The kid's a freshman. This is his first time in competition. And especially against a team like UNC, who has guards that have been deep in the tournament and know what college basketball is like in these big games. Granted, Schifino is a national championship winner. He won it at Montverde last year. But it'll be really interesting to see the guard play because Indiana specifically at guard, Xavier Johnson, I will not be surprised if he gets into foul trouble early in this game. That's all I'm going to say. So it's really going to be, can Jalen Hood-Schifino step up? And Tamar Bates, what's he going to do? It just depends. He's going to chuck up a lot of deep threes just out of time because the Indiana offense, when X is on the bench and Jalen, is looking like a freshman, it doesn't run so smooth. And I think we've seen that bits and pieces to start games early this season.
Yeah, and I think that's an area where North Carolina is going to be able to exploit Indiana, frankly, because obviously Caleb Love is there, and he's 6'4" and he's got all the size and really excels at playing the passing lanes. So the one thing I think that North Carolina is going to allow Indiana to do is to dribble the ball a little bit. They're not a pressure defense like they have historically been. Hubert Davis got away from that. They've changed their ball screen coverages a little bit. They do things differently there, but there is Caleb Love. I think a lot of people forget about RJ Davis being at North Carolina. And this is a guy who is a top 50 recruit. If he had the same body as Caleb Love, he'd already be in the NBA. He's a 38% 3-point shooter. He's got the ball in the rope. He's like basketball Messi. He doesn't let that thing go. Crazy handle. He can split pick and rolls. He's really, really good going around the rim. And defensively, he's a pest. He's a guy who's not afraid to mix it up. He's not afraid to pressure people. And he's somebody who I think, probably doesn't get the national love that he deserves just because of the presence of Caleb Love and his status. But RJ Davis is a really, really good player. They're both going to be on the Bob Cousy list at, midseason. The thing that will be interesting for me to see is RJ Davis doesn't have a ton of size, and IU's guards do have a little bit more of that. So how are you able to neutralize him? How are you able to prevent him from getting to his spots? Because once RJ Davis starts heating up, like we saw against Duke in the Final Four, it's really tough for defenses when you have to deal with both Caleb Love and RJ Davis firing on all cylinders.
And if you look at the early storylines for both of these teams, they're not shooting the ball very well from behind the arc.
No.
I believe it's somewhere like 26%. I was trying to do the mental math earlier. Indiana, yeah, they shot 46%, but a lot of those threes came in, the second half and they were already up, 60 to 30. Like, those threes, do they really matter? No. It's great to pad stats. As media, we love them because it just makes our work easier after the game. But at the end of the day, if you're not shooting that good percentage early on, like Miller Kopp was 1 of 4 in his first game. He was 4-4 in the second game, but it took him a while. It took him about 6 minutes to shoot a 3 in that game against Bethune-Cookman. I just think that's what this game's going to come down to. So if I really had to pick what I'm watching for, it's who shoots better behind the arc.
Yeah, and you're totally right that North Carolina is not doing that right now. And Pete Nance is a great example of that. He was a guy who is brought in to fill the role that Brady Manick left last season. And Brady Manick's a guy who, was UNC's best three-point shooter and its highest volume one. He was shooting 10 threes a game by the end of the NCAA tournament and making 45% of them. Like, those guys don't grow on trees. And Pete Nance is not one of those guys. He's a fine three-point shooter, but at a much, much smaller volume. So, like I said, Pete didn't make any threes in the first 2 games. He made 3 in the second. What's the middle ground? Hopefully 1 or 2 a game. But if he's not hitting either, then all of a sudden UNC's guards have a much bigger load. So I too am watching for the 3-point shooting in this match.
And who would have thought, before Zach, I'll let you get to the next question, but who would have thought we'd be sitting here talking about Indiana, UNC, and just talking about Northwestern players like the whole time? Like that to me is just wild. But Zach, I'll let you continue.
Yeah. So I just want to jump in real quick. I want to get into predictions. And I'll go first. And then I'll let you guys, do your thing. So I see a highly contested ball game. This is going to be the craziest game, I think, basketball wise, I will probably ever go to. Whiteout crowd. Are you going, Brendan? I just have to ask.
I'm trying to see if American Airlines will let me change my flight. Because North Carolina, and this is going to be part of my prediction, but North Carolina is coming straight from Portland. They're going straight from Portland. So they're going from the East Coast to Pacific time back to Indiana. They're not making a return back in Chapel Hill. These dudes are going to be gassed. So, but continue.
Right. Okay. That said, this is going to be a highly contested game. I think you're going to see, mid 60s, high 70s score. And I'm looking towards, the Race Thompsons or those Pete Nances who are going to be able to hit those threes in crunch time. And whoever, is going to clutch up is going to win this ball game. And I think it's important to notice, you got 2 coaches and 2 programs who they kind of need, at least I think Indiana needs this win more than UNC just because of the fact it's Woodson's second year and he didn't, a lot of people weren't very happy the way the regular season went as far as Big Ten play, especially after we beat Purdue last year. And, we have a home game, this much anticipated game. And I see, I could see it even go into overtime again, like I said last year with Syracuse, which would be awesome. But I'd say let's go like 68-65 with, Race hitting a game-winning 3. Race Thompson, baby.
Game-winning 3. Wow, that's a bold take.
It's a stretch.
I'll let you go first because he just gave the Indiana side.
Yeah, so I think, the fact that North Carolina, I would agree with you that I think North Carolina doesn't probably need this game as much as Indiana does. I think it's probably going to be more imperative for Indiana to really make that statement marquee win. But again, like I said, North Carolina is going to be gassed. And this is a situation where they've been in a similar travel situation before, and that's not something to be discounted. North Carolina is going to play games on Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Before that, they're going to be going between time zones. They're not going to have any time to rest and recover. And in the past, that has usually not gone well for this team. So I think, largely because of the product of, where the rest of the schedule is, you're talking about a team that could potentially be facing like Villanova and Michigan State in the span of 3 days before this. They're going to be physically exhausted. They're going to be mentally exhausted. I think that North Carolina is the better team. I think it's the deeper team. And I think it probably has higher end talent across the board. Not saying that Trace isn't, of that same caliber. But I think, if you go up and down every position in the starting lineup, I think North Carolina just has more talent. But I don't know that they're going to have enough in the tank for this one. So I'm actually going to pick Indiana to win this game. I think it's going to be a reality check sort of deal for North Carolina. Winning that game would obviously be huge and would look great in the resume for the NCAA tournament. But I'm just not sure that mentally this team is there yet. And, like we said, a loss in November is not the end of the world, but that's sort of what I'm anticipating.
All right. Well, as somebody who's traveled with Indiana to Portland from the Eastern time zone, it is a lot. And to see this Indiana team, what they had to do back in April or March when they went from playing in the first four, hopping on a plane, that plane got delayed pretty much all night. So they took off at like 6 a.m. to get out to Portland to play St. Mary's the next day and get crushed. You can clearly tell that the Indiana team, they were tired, they were exhausted. You had to play 3 games in the Big Ten tournament to even make it, then fly out to Dayton. And it's just so much travel where I do agree it's going to catch up. I think it's still going to be close, though. In games like this, I mean, you have, first of all, I know people who are getting online for this at 6 a.m. in the morning at least. People who are like talking about camping out. That's how big of a deal this is going to be. And I mean, we're going to cover the crap out of this game, which is so much fun. But if you really look at these two teams and my predictions, I do think Indiana's going to get the win. As much as I'm concerned because it's going to come from the 3-point line. That's who's going to determine what's going to win. And Indiana, you're playing in Assembly Hall, you're at home with your fans in the stands. I just think they're gonna handle this one pretty well. I think they win by like 7 or 8 points. I don't think it's gonna be super close. I definitely don't see Race Thompson being the difference maker and hitting a 3 at the end of the game. That's definitely an absurd take. But I think it's somebody like a bench player, like a Jordan Geronimo, who's had experience and has come into games like big games and has provided energy. It's gonna be somebody off the bench for Indiana that's gonna provide a spark, and they're gonna click, go on a run, be up by 3 at halftime, and come out firing in the second half. That's how I think this game is going to go. I think it's going to be similar to the Texas game from last night. When Texas Gonzaga, you had that team that, they brought in guys off the bench and they just shot the lights out and looked really good. I think it's going to be somewhere more of that style just because of the travel. This was a neutral ground game and both the teams had rest. I do think North Carolina is definitely the better team on paper. But basketball is not a game played on paper. It's played in person, and especially at Assembly Hall when you're going to have that crowd loud and ready to go and waiting all day for this. I'll go Indiana. I'll go 68-60. I think it'll be high scoring. I think it'll definitely be a fun game. But I just at the end of the day think Indiana, they'll be better rested and they'll be prepared for this game versus a UNC team that's flying all over the country for this.
Yeah, and Indiana plays Little Rock and Jackson State the 2 games before UNC, both at home. So they more than likely will be more rested. This game is going to take place on November 30th at 9:15. It's going to be a nationally televised game. I know, like you said, Evan, if people are going to be lining up at 6 a.m. for this, I know at Duke it's different. They were camping out, whatever, 2 months or a month before the Coach K game. But, I don't think the weather's going to be good. I don't know what to expect. I think.
Well, luckily they don't play outdoors, so the weather doesn't matter.
Yeah. Not really, but everyone's gonna be bundled up in an assembly hall, and yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we have this matchup and matchups like we had last night is so good for college basketball, and the fact that we're talking about it. And I want to know, guys like Caleb Love, Jalen Hood-Schifino, they're more than likely going to be in the NBA, and there's going to be a lot of NBA scouts there. So they're not even only going to be wanting to put on a show for the fans and, people watching at home, but, their draft stock as well. So yeah, that said, we got this game happening in less than 2 weeks now, November 30th. UNC's got, little bit more traveling than Indiana, but we'll see what happens. And I'm juiced. I'm pumped up. I'm sure you guys are too. And Brendan, thank you so much for joining me and Evan today. Much respect to your Tar Heels. I know you also cover Duke as well. So you are very, very spoiled with your reporting there. But I hope you can make it out to Assembly Hall. And yeah.
Yeah, I hope I can too. It'll be a great game, and I will say, North Carolina sort of lives for these atmospheres. So quite frankly, maybe this is sort of what North Carolina needs to wake up. But it'll certainly be a great game. It'll be one of the better games in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brendan. Appreciate it. Evan, take care. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me as well.
Yes, sir.